During this Black History Month, we're bringing you a series that you will only find here on Spectrum News 1.
We're taking you on a journey to Halifax County. It's just about 30 minutes south of the Virginia line. The county of roughly around 50,000 people is filled with a deep and rich history. Halifax County played a role in the lives of free and enslaved Black people. 3 locations within the county are designated sites for the National Park Service's Network to Freedom. They include the Roanoke Canal, the Roanoke River, and the Old Town of Halifax, or Historic Halifax. All 3 were part of the Underground Railroad's transportation network.
Our Alexis Bell joins us here in the studio this morning. And Alexis, I know you're going to introduce us to one man who's made it his mission to uncover more about Halifax's history and make more people aware of it, right?
Yes, that's right. His name is Rodney Pierce. He's a researcher and a historian turned teacher. And of course, he knows a lot about the history of Halifax County and has become part of it. He recalls growing up there and learning about how Black people were enslaved and the usual civil rights leaders, but he says he did not learn about that local history. So today, we're sharing with you a little bit of that history. It's the first railroad hub of the South. It's where the first action was taken in 1776, calling for independence from Britain. It's Halifax County, founded right on the Roanoke River.
It's a lot of history. A lot of history in this river.
Rodney Pierce grew up here. He says if this river could talk.
It tells the story of all of the people who have been inhabitants here. The white businessmen who sailed steamships along it. It would also tell you about the enslaved people who used it to seek freedom and a better life for themselves.
He says these stories of his people are often drowned out, rarely taught in schools, and difficult for family members to pass down.
They wanted to protect us. They didn't want us to go through what they went through during those times. They didn't want us to live in fear. They didn't want us to have to worry about, having guns pulled on us and things of that nature, but nothing's really changed.
He had to seek out information on his own. In 2013, his journey started. From the river, through the county, to the Roanoke Canal Museum and Trail, where he was the cultural resource leader. This is where he says he uncovered missing pieces of the town's history.
It was in 2013 that I made the connection between the canal being a part of the Underground Railroad. We knew that the Underground Railroad ran through the town of Halifax, and we knew that it ran through the Roanoke River, which is right over there. And so knowing that the bateaux were driven by enslaved Black men who sometimes did not have white supervisors, I, hypothesized, hey, these guys probably were using these barrels that they were carrying salt and other goods in to sneak enslaved people to freedom.
Painting the picture of what it may have been like for enslaved people working on bateaux or boats in Halifax County in the 1800s. This, one of those bateaux. He says after learning this, he had to find a way to pass it down to the next generation.
And I also knew that if I wasn't taught what I had learned while working here, then they probably weren't being taught that either. And so they needed to know.
Because what he did know about the canal from school
was a history of chattel slavery, of being property and helping to build it as free labor. And that was discouraging, and I knew that that's not empowering for young children, especially young African-American children. So I set out to learn in what other ways were we involved. I just wanted to make sure that everybody understood their part in the story, not only of the city, but of the county, so nobody felt excluded.
He's truly a wealth of knowledge, and beyond the classroom, since he's a teacher, his activism goes on into the community.
Yeah, inspiring, and glad that he's talking about this, something that we could all learn from in that history. Alexis, I know you spent a lot of time working on this project. What was it like for you being out there?
Right, myself, our photog Fred, executive director Marie, all were so excited for this project, and just being out there was so surreal to be at that river and see, this is where a lot of enslaved people got into North Carolina. Some fled there, and like he mentioned, it's not in some far off place, and actually being there and seeing, this is where it happened here in North Carolina. And so I'm super excited about the more coming tomorrow in the series talking about what's going on present day in that community.
You've got a lot of interesting stories all week long, so we'll look forward to seeing those. Alexis, thanks very much.
Growing up, just riding through Becker Farms and just knowing this is where all the white folks live.
It's something Rodney Pierce remembers while growing up in Halifax County.
This is where the money is.
It's an image of wealth disparity that becomes apparent as Pierce drives from Roanoke Rapids to the other side of the tracks in historic Weldon. The town says it was a bustling center of activity during the Civil War with several Confederate training camps in the area. Well, one Confederate remains, leaving the current community fighting a different battle. And Pierce says he's here for the fight.
This is the oldest Confederate memorial in Halifax County. It's over 111 years old. It was erected in 1908 by the Junius Daniel chapter of the United Daughters of the Confederacy.
And was relocated here in 1934, back when this was a predominantly white neighborhood. But now,
This statue is in a predominantly black neighborhood and a predominantly black town, Weldon being over 70% black. You cannot get through this intersection without going around this statue.
and for community members, that's a problem.
We hope it's not a long process.
Angela Person wants the statue down.
The children stand out playing and riding their bikes and trying to enjoy life as young black children. And then they have this statue standing over top of them with a gun in his hand. And I would be threatened. I would go home and ask questions. You know, why is this man here with a gun standing, hovering over me?
Questions that have caused a community to come together and advocate for change, to take down this statue, standing 27 feet tall in memory of Confederate soldiers, and to move it to historic Halifax, a land that holds other historic artifacts.
I would prefer it be publicized, but if it's going to lead, like I said, I want it done peaceful, safer, and legal. So if it would help that, if they did it in the middle of the night, as long as it's gone, that would be great.
I think it should be public. Don't do it in the dead of the night. You didn't do it in the dead of the night when you put it up.
This monument unveiled newspaper clipping says 3,000 people showed up when the statue was dedicated. General Robert E. Lee's grandson gave a speech, and it's not the only place in town still showcasing Confederate ties. At the courthouse, a stone sits out front, honoring Confederate Junius Daniel.
This is where your county commissioners meet. This is where your board of elections is. This is where your county finance office is, your county legal office, and your county manager's office. And you have a memorial to a Confederate general on a rock, of all things, on the front lawn of that building. A rock symbolizes stability, a foundation, strength. So are you saying that Halifax County government, a lot of which is in this building, is built on the foundation of the Confederate States of America? You can't have it both ways. You either have allegiance to the United States or your allegiance is to the Confederate States. One or the other. No man can serve two masters. Isn't that what the words say?
I want to be ready, walk in Jerusalem just like John.
This is a pilgrimage the Hawkins family takes every family reunion. It's a chance to pay respect to their ancestors and a trip Dr. Terrence Weiss, a genealogist in Halifax County, takes often. He's a Hawkins descendant and a close friend of Rodney Pierce.
When we came out here, it's trying to clean it up because it was really looking really bad.
Right.
Pierce says he considers Weiss a lifelong mentor. Weiss showing the historian through a part of the county he's never seen before. It's Weiss's ancestry.
Now, Reverend Captain Hawkins, he was not a slave, but his father was a slave. His name was Robert Hawkins, and he is listed in the slave register. Next to this is his mother-in-law, Lizzie Diggs Hicks, as well as his wife, Sally Diggs Hawkins.
He knows their names, how many children they had, their jobs. He has their marriage certificates, death certificates, and deeper into the woods are more. The headstone of George Green, a slave owner who wanted to be buried with the people he owned. It begs the question.
Did Black lives really matter during that time?
Yes and no.
Weiss says they must have been valued enough for a slave owner to want to be buried with enslaved people, but not enough to not be exploited. Their graves just marked by these stones, and others just
A lot of sunken holes, sunken ground, which is showing you that our ancestors are buried right here.
all going back to Sari Hawkins. There are no pictures of her, just a name of a woman born around 1780 who, based on records, is the start of 95% of the Black Hawkins family lineage in Halifax County. Sari is a special connection for descendants proud to carry her name, and she's Weiss's fifth great-grandmother.
We believe that she's buried right here on these grounds.
And through careful digging, he reveals to Pierce for the first time another family descendant.
You know what's even more important about telling the story? She's your sixth great grandmother.
Wow.
And he sees the proof.
Oh, wow. There's a grandma. You're going to make me cry. You know that, right? That's the woman who raised me right here.
And the woman who introduced the two, Pierce, instantly gaining hundreds of ancestors to join him on his journey. And it's on the same land where Weish got the call to assemble them.
Look back, I heard an audible voice.
Right.
It just in my mind it said, tell our story. And I sought to just make them come alive. Good morning.
In the Halifax County Library, these file cabinets hold old records of people's families. It's where genealogist Terrence Weish has spent most of his Saturdays in the 90s.
Families, they would find records maybe, Bible records and different things such as that. They would get copies and actually put them in there.
For people like Weish to find who are trying to connect the dots, it's where he found a copy of this slave registry.
Because they were actually the property of one of the former slave masters' grandchildren.
It was a major find for him.
What was told in oral history by, our parents and grandparents, etc., actually is validated because it actually had the names of the slaves, who their parents were, and the dates that they were actually born.
He found his third great-grandfather in this registry and Sari, the first recorded Black Hawkins.
There was no Ancestry.com. So you had to go through the files, open up these old documents and the dust and everything just falling. You had no choice but to do it. But it was just so rewarding to just be able to just see that these names that you heard so much about, they began to become alive.
All recorded now in these books that he put together. It starts with the history of the white Hawkins slave owners from Virginia, like James Madison Hawkins, who enslaved Weish's ancestors.
When I first started, I was the only, African-American sitting around the table. And coming in the midst of a lot of older, Caucasian, people who seemed like they knew exactly what they were doing was somewhat a bit intimidating. Afterwards, though, when I had an opportunity to really sit and talk with them, I discovered that they were actually descendants of some of the ones who had enslaved my ancestors.
It's how he connected with Daniel and Grace Lucas. Daniel, a descendant of James Madison Hawkins.
Good to see you.
They still live on the same plantation, and Daniel lived in the original house that sat on the plantation.
But you were, in this house till you were 11.
Yes.
And in their backyard is where James Madison Hawkins and 8 other family members are buried.
This is James Madison right here, and they planted the tree when he died.
All research Weish has used to reconnect the Hawkins family.
I looked through the book, and it was just, all I could think of was all the work. Oh my goodness, the work. And the pictures and all the forms and documents that were copied. And it's just such a heads up and a foot up to any young person that would want to be doing any kind of ancestry study, to have that already there and to know where they came from. I just think it's wonderful.
9 times out of 10, if they from Halifax County, even some in Northampton County, you might be related.
It's what this family likes to do.
We couldn't date, couldn't go traveling, couldn't go to a ball game.
Share stories.
Until my mom and dad approved of it. I thought they were just being overprotective. But come to find out, they were just looking out, making sure that we won't date in our cousins.
It's a story a lot of them share because they didn't know about all their family connections.
And for so long, I just thought it was just us, the Mary Jane Hawkins grandchildren. Until, again, as when I met him, then he, opened the door to so many Hawkins and the ancestors and all my distant cousins. And I thought that was really a blessing.
The family immediately opening up and embracing each other.
We feel like that's what should happen. We don't look at, 20th cousin. It doesn't matter. Just as good as being first cousin.
For some, it's a new connection to family.
We went to the slave cemetery to let him know that Sarah is also his 6th great grandmother.
And one that dates back centuries.
I have to believe that my ancestors thought for Sarah were praying, God-fearing people. So even though they got dispersed, those prayers followed the lineage and put us back together again.
And we were just so proud that Dr. Terrence did decide to put it in writing. So a lot of those stories that we heard are now living history.
He hasn't asked for any recognition. He's just doing what he liked to do, research, read, research. And when we walked into the cemetery, he said, these are the people where the stones are. And so now we have stones of remembrance that we can go to that place and know that this is sacred ground because Sarah was here. Orrin, Sealy, Winster, all of her children once were here, and we can embrace that.
The foundation has been laid. The story has been told.
The Lord with me, give him the
But it hasn't ended yet. We have told just maybe a few chapters, but there's still other stories to be told. Never forget Sarah.